Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The courtroom was already tense before a single question was asked, the air thick with whispers and the scrape of wooden benches as spectators leaned forward, hungry for drama. Willow sat in the witness chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on a point just above the judge's bench as if staring directly at anyone might crack the fragile calm she'd built around herself. Drew stood at the defense table, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid, every muscle in his body screaming restraint. The judge called the room to order, and the prosecutor rose slowly, smoothing her jacket as she approached Willow with a measured smile that promised anything but kindness. "Miss Tate," she began, voice sharp and clear, "let's start with the night in question. You were at the courtroom house, correct?" Willow swallowed, nodded once. "Yes. And Drew Kane was there with you?" The pause before Willow answered was just long enough to make the gallery murmur. "Yes, he was." Drew's eyes flicked to Willow, a silent plea for caution, but she didn't look at him. The prosecutor paced a step closer, heels clicking against the floor like a ticking clock. "You testified earlier that Drew left the room before the confrontation occurred." "That's right," Willow said softly. "But you also told Detective Chase in your initial statement that Drew was present when voices were raised." Willow's breath caught. I was confused that night." "Confused?" the prosecutor repeated, arching a brow. "Or protecting someone?" A ripple of gasps swept through the courtroom. Drew slammed his hand on the table. "Objection." The judge raised a hand. "Sustained. Counselor, rephrase." The prosecutor nodded, unfazed. "Miss Tate, did Drew ask you to lie for him?" Willow's eyes finally darted toward Drew, panic flashing across her face. "No. He didn't ask me to lie." "Then why did your story change?" Willow's voice trembled. "Because I remembered more clearly later." "Or because you realized the consequences?" The prosecutor leaned in. "You're married to Michael Corinthos. You have a child. You knew telling the truth could destroy multiple families." Willow's lips parted, and for a moment it looked like she might cry. Drew pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly. "This is harassment," he snapped. "She's being badgered." The judge shot him a warning look. "Mr. Kane, sit down or I will have you removed." Drew sat, but his eyes burned. Willow took a shaky breath. "I said what I remembered," she insisted. "I didn't lie." "Then answer this," the prosecutor said, voice suddenly colder. "Did Drew confront the victim that night?" Willow's fingers tightened together until her knuckles whitened. "He was angry," she admitted. The courtroom erupted in whispers again. Drew stood abruptly. "Willow, stop." The judge slammed her gavel. "Order. Mr. Kane, you will sit down." Drew hesitated, torn between fury and fear, then sat, hands shaking. Willow stared straight ahead, tears brimming now. "Yes," she said, barely audible. "He confronted him." The prosecutor seized the moment. "And during that confrontation, did Drew threaten him?" Silence stretched painfully long. Willow closed her eyes. "He said things he didn't mean." "Did he threaten him?" the prosecutor pressed. Willow opened her eyes, tears spilling over. "Yes." Drew's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "That's not what happened." The prosecutor turned toward the jury. "Let the record show the witness has confirmed a threat." Drew shot to his feet again. "That's not what she said." "Enough," the judge barked. "Mr. Kane, one more outburst and you will be held in contempt." Drew clenched his fists, breathing hard. Willow's shoulders shook as she continued. "He was upset. Anyone would have been. He thought he was protecting me." The prosecutor tilted her head. "Protecting you from what, Miss Tate?" Willow hesitated. Then the words spilled out before she could stop them. "From the truth." A stunned hush fell over the room. Michael, seated behind the prosecution, stared at Willow in disbelief. Carly's eyes widened, while Nina's hand flew to her mouth. Drew looked at Willow as if she'd struck him. "What truth?" the prosecutor asked quietly. Willow's voice broke. That Drew knew more than he admitted. That he was there when it all happened. Drew shook his head violently. "Willow, don't." The judge leaned forward. Miss Tate, you are under oath. Answer the question. Willow nodded, tears streaming freely now. Drew was there. He didn't pull the trigger, but he was there. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Voices overlapped, the jury whispered furiously, and the judge hammered her gavel again and again. Order! I will clear this courtroom if necessary. Drew staggered back as if physically hit, his chest heaving. Why are you doing this? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The prosecutor allowed the noise to die down before delivering the final blow. Miss Tate, did Drew instruct you on what to say to police? Willow looked at Drew one last time, anguish written all over her face. He asked me to be careful, she said. He said the truth could hurt people we love. And did you interpret that as a request to lie? Willow hesitated, then whispered, yes. Drew snapped. In a flash, he crossed the space between them, fury overtaking reason. How dare you? He shouted. Before anyone could react, his hand flew out. The sound of the slap echoed through the courtroom, sharp and unmistakable. Willow cried out, recoiling as the impact sent her stumbling back in the witness chair. Gasps turned into screams. Michael leapt to his feet. Drew! Security rushed forward, grabbing Drew by the arms as he struggled wildly. Let go of me, he roared. She's lying. She's destroying everything. The judge was on her feet now, face pale with shock and anger. Mr. Kane, you are in contempt of court and under arrest. Officers cuffed Drew as the courtroom descended into pandemonium. Willow sobbed openly, clutching her cheek, Nina rushing to her side while Michael stood frozen, torn between rage and heartbreak. I'm so sorry, Willow cried, voice cracking. I didn't want it to come out like this. Drew was dragged toward the exit, still shouting. You think this makes you righteous? You think you're protecting your family? He twisted to look at Willow one last time. You just ruined mine. The doors slammed behind him, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The judge called for a recess, her voice trembling with controlled fury. The jury was ushered out, still buzzing with disbelief. Willow sat shaking, mascara streaking down her face, as Michael finally moved toward her. Why? He asked quietly, pain etched into every line of his face. Why didn't you tell me? Willow looked up at him, eyes red and raw. Because I was scared, she whispered. Scared of losing you. Scared of what Drew would do. Nina wrapped an arm around her. You did the right thing, she murmured, though her own eyes were filled with conflict. Carly watched from across the room, expression unreadable, already calculating the fallout this would bring. Outside, Drew was pushed into a patrol car, his anger giving way to hollow shock. The image of Willow's face at the moment of impact replayed in his mind, twisting his gut with regret and disbelief. I didn't mean to, he muttered, voice breaking for the first time. I lost control. The officer shut the door without a word. Back inside, the courtroom slowly emptied, but the damage lingered like a scar. Willow remained seated long after everyone else had gone, staring at the witness stand as if it might offer answers. Her voice echoed in her own head, the words she'd said under oath impossible to take back. Drew's slap wasn't just a moment of violence. It was the final undeniable proof that the truth she tried to bury had teeth, and it had finally bitten everyone she loved. The gasp that echoed through the courtroom was not merely a sound but a physical entity, a living shockwave that sucked the air from the lungs of every spectator, attorney, and officer of the court. For a suspended, crystalline moment, time fractured. The stately wood-paneled room, a theater of solemn procedure and measured words, had just witnessed an act of raw, unmediated violence. The sharp, startling crack of palm against cheek had sliced through the legalese like a thunderclap on a still day. At the epicenter stood Willow Tate, her head snapped to the side, a bloom of scarlet already flowering on her pale cheek, her eyes wide not with pain at first, but with pure, unadulterated disbelief. And before her, trembling with a fury that seemed to vibrate the very space around her, was Drew Kane, his hand still raised, his expression a harrowing mask of betrayal, grief, and a rage so profound it had momentarily obliterated every social contract, every rule of law, every ounce of hard-won self-control he possessed. The journey to this cataclysmic second was not a straight line but a winding, poisoned river, fed by tributaries of deception, desperate love, and a secret so monumental it had the power to shatter not just lives, but the very foundations of identity. To understand the slap was to understand the tectonic pressure that had been building beneath the surface of Port Charles for months, pressure centered on the fragile, miraculous life of a baby boy named Wiley Corinthos, and the women who claimed him. Willow's testimony had begun with the quiet, tremulous resolve of someone walking a plank. She was there under subpoena, a reluctant witness in a custody battle that had escalated into a war. On one side stood her adoptive mother, the formidable and deeply wounded Harmony Tate, whose claims to Wiley were tenuous at best, manipulative at worst. On the other stood Michael Corinthos and his wife, Sasha Gilmore, who had raised Wiley as their own, their love for him a beacon in their tumultuous lives. The court was to decide placement, but everyone in that room, from Judge Walters down to the bailiff, knew this was about more than custody. It was about lineage, truth, and a mother's primal claim. Drew had been seated behind Michael and Sasha, a pillar of silent support. His relationship to the case was personal, woven through friendship with Michael and a shared history of trials. He believed in their cause. He also believed with every fiber of his being in Willow. He saw her as a victim of Harmony's manipulation, a kind-hearted soul caught in a web not of her making. His protective feelings toward her had deepened into something profound and unspoken, a constant, steady current of care. As she took the stand, he sent her a look meant to convey strength, a silent reminder that she was among friends. She had avoided his eyes. Harmony's attorney, a sleek vulture of a man named Edwell, began with soft-spoken, insidious questions. He walked Willow through her early days with Wiley, her initial bonding with the child when he was believed to be Sonny Corinthos' son, her struggles with health and identity. It was a prelude, a lulling melody before the dissonant crash. Then he shifted. "Miss Tate," Edwell said, adjusting his glasses, "let's discuss your medical history. Specifically, the period approximately 2 years ago. You were diagnosed with a form of leukemia, is that correct?" Willow's breath hitched. "Yes. And as part of your treatment you required a bone marrow transplant. A life-saving procedure." "Yes. And a search was conducted for a donor. A familial match is often the best hope, is it not?" Objections were raised from Michael's attorney, citing relevance. Judge Walters, with a keen eye, allowed it. "The witness's medical history may speak to broader family connections," he intoned, unaware of the avalanche he was authorizing. Edwell continued. "Your adoptive mother, Harmony Tate, was tested, was she not?" "She was. And she was not a match." "No. Other relatives?" "Your adoptive father." I didn't have other relatives. Not that I knew of." Edwell paced slowly, letting the silence pool. Drew leaned forward, his brow furrowed. He knew this story. He'd held Willow's hand through the fear of it. He'd celebrated when she found her donor. "But you did find a donor, Miss Tate. A miraculous match. An anonymous, unrelated donor who saved your life." Willow's voice was a whisper. "Yes. Isn't it true?" Edwell said, his voice dropping to a confidential yet courtroom-filling murmur, "that the identity of that donor later became known to you?" The air grew thick. Michael glanced at Sasha, whose hand had flown to her mouth. Drew's instincts, the ones honed in special ops and corporate battles, began to scream a silent alarm. I learned who it was later, yes," Willow admitted, her knuckles white where she gripped the rail of the witness stand. "And that person was Nellie Benson." "Correct." The name landed like a curse. Nellie Benson. The chaotic, manipulative, now deceased woman who had been Wiley's biological mother. The woman who had terrorized half of Port Charles. A murmur rippled through the gallery. "Yes," Willow breathed. "And what did you make of this extraordinary coincidence? That the woman who was the biological mother of the child you cared for was also your perfect, life-saving bone marrow match? A match so perfect it's statistically almost impossible for unrelated individuals. I thought it was a miracle. A strange, twisted miracle." Edwell offered a thin, humorless smile. "Miracles often have a basis in biology, Miss Tate. Science. Genetics." He paused, letting the word genetics hang, heavy and ominous. "A match that perfect isn't just unlikely for unrelated persons. It's virtually diagnostic. It strongly, overwhelmingly suggests a close biological relationship." Drew felt the first cold trickle of dread in his veins. He was connecting dots faster than he could stop his own mind. Nellie was Wiley's mother. A perfect marrow match to Willow. The math was terrifying and simple. Willow looked like a deer in the lethal glare of headlights. "What are you saying?" Edwell turned to face the jury. Then the judge, finally landing his gaze back on Willow. "I'm saying, Miss Tate, that the miracle that saved your life was no coincidence. It was a revelation. Nellie Benson wasn't just your donor. She was your biological sister. Is that not correct?" The gasp that time was smaller but sharper. It was the sound of a puzzle piece, ugly and misshapen, being forced into place. Michael stared, his mind reeling. Sasha clutched his arm. Harmony, seated at the plaintiff's table, wore a look of tragic vindication, tears streaming down her face. Willow closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust of her composure. For weeks she had carried this secret. She had learned it in a haze of shock and grief after Nellie's death. A truth buried in medical records and a confession from a remorseful Dr. Liesel Obrecht. She had buried it, terrified of what it meant, of the connection to a woman of such darkness, and most terrifying of all, of what it meant for her connection to Wiley. "Miss Tate," Judge Walters prompted gently but firmly, "you must answer the question." She opened her eyes, and they were filled with a world of pain. "Yes," she said, the word tearing from her throat. "Nellie is my biological sister." The fallout was immediate and audible. But Edwell wasn't finished. He had one more tectonic plate to shift. "And if Nellie Benson is your biological sister, Miss Tate, that makes you the biological aunt of Wiley Corinthos Jones. But it also raises another, even more pressing question. One that goes to the very heart of this custody proceeding. If Harmony Tate is not your biological mother, and Nellie's biological mother is known to be..." He didn't have to finish. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. The identity of Nellie's mother was one of Port Charles's most notorious secrets. A secret held by a handful of people. One of whom was Drew Kane. Drew felt the blood drain from his face. His own history with Nellie was complex, marked by manipulation but also a strange, tragic loyalty. He knew who her mother was. He had promised on his honor to keep that secret. He watched Willow silently begging her, "Don't go there. Don't say it." Edwell pounced on her hesitation. "Who is your biological mother, Miss Tate? If not Harmony, who gave birth to you and Nellie Benson? Who is the biological grandmother of Wiley Corinthos Jones?" The pressure was a physical weight on Willow's chest. Her gaze, frantic, swept the room. It landed on Harmony, whose face was a silent plea of her own, a plea for forgiveness, for understanding. It landed on Michael and Sasha, their expressions a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. And finally, in her panic, her search for an anchor, it landed on Drew. His eyes were wide, warning, shaking almost imperceptibly. "No, Willow. Don't." But Willow was drowning. The secret was a stone tied to her ankles, and the water was over her head. The attorney's question wasn't just a legal inquiry. It was a demand for her very origin story. In that moment of sheer, unthinking terror, the words spilled out, a desperate attempt to share the burden, to deflect the blinding spotlight, to name the truth that she felt was destroying her. I didn't know for most of my life," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "Harmony kept it from me. She stole me, she raised me, but she wasn't my mother." She was sobbing now, the words coming in ragged bursts. "I only found out recently. My mother, our mother. Nellie's and mine." Drew stood up. It was an involuntary movement, a jerk of his entire body as if pulled by a string. "Willow, don't," he said, his voice hoarse, cutting through the courtroom murmur. The judge slammed his gavel, calling for order. But it was too late. Willow, looking directly at Drew, seeing his intervention not as protection but as a confirmation of the shamefulness of her truth, blurted it out. "It's Nina Reeves. My biological mother is Nina Reeves." The silence this time was absolute. A vacuum of sound. Then chaos. Nina Reeves. The publisher of The Invader. The woman locked in a bitter feud with Carly Corinthos. The woman who had, just months prior, been revealed to have been in a years-long coma, having lost a child, 2 children. The woman who was, at this very moment, sitting in this courtroom, having come to support Michael and Sasha, her relationship with them newly forged and fragile. Every head swiveled to the gallery where Nina sat frozen. Her face, usually so composed, was a monument to shock. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes, huge and disbelieving, locked on Willow, the daughter she had believed lost forever. The child she had mourned for decades was not only alive but had been in her orbit for years. And she had just learned it here in this brutal public arena. But the reaction was not contained to Nina. The implications exploded like shrapnel. If Nina was Willow's mother and Willow was Wiley's aunt, then Nina was Wiley's biological grandmother. This changed the custody calculus in ways no one had anticipated. Harmony's claims were obliterated, but a new powerful biological claim had just been uttered into existence. Michael looked gutted. This was his father's bitter enemy, a woman he had only recently begun to tolerate. Sasha looked devastated for him, for Wiley, for the family she thought they were securing. And Drew saw it all. He saw the bomb detonate. He saw the naked, shattered look on Nina's face. A woman he had come to know. A woman whose pain he understood in a unique way, given his own history with memory and identity loss. He saw the strategic catastrophe for Michael and Sasha. But more than anything, he saw the profound, unforgivable betrayal. Willow had just violated a confidence of the most sacred order. She had not just revealed Nina's secret, she had weaponized it. She had taken a truth that belonged in whispers, in careful private revelation, and had used it as a shield in her own moment of panic, exposing Nina in the most cruel public way imaginable. She had broken a trust that went beyond mere secrecy. She had, in his eyes, sacrificed another person's soul to save herself a moment of discomfort. All the care, all the protectiveness, all the soft, growing feelings he had for Willow curdled in an instant, transformed into a white-hot fury. It was a fury born of a soldier's code. You don't leave your comrades exposed. It was a fury born of a man who valued honor above almost all else. It was a fury born of watching a person he cared for commit an act of such profound cowardice that it rendered every previous kindness a lie. He moved without thought. The gallery was in an uproar. The judge's gavel pounding ineffectually. Attorneys were on their feet. Nina was sobbing into her hands. Michael was yelling something at his lawyer. And Willow, released from the witness stand in the chaos, was stumbling down the steps, her face a mess of tears, heading for the aisle looking shell-shocked and lost. Drew intercepted her. He didn't plan to. His body simply acted. He stepped into her path, blocking her exit. She looked up at him, and in her eyes, he saw the aftermath of her confession, but he also saw a glimmer of relief, as if she expected him, her steadfast Drew, to understand, to comfort her, to be her port in this storm she had created. Drew, she whispered, her voice broken. That single syllable, the assumption of his solidarity, was the final spark. How could you? His voice was low, a guttural tremor that was more frightening than a shout. How could you do that to her? To anyone? Willow flinched. I had to. The question. I was under oath. Under oath to tell the truth about yourself, he snarled, his control fraying into nothingness. Not to eviscerate someone else's life in front of a packed courtroom. That was Nina's truth to tell Willow. Hers. You had no right. You were scared, so you just burned her world down to save your own skin. The raw accusation, the utter contempt in his tone, shattered her remaining composure. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to have your whole life be a lie. To have that question hanging over you. I don't know. Drew laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I don't know about having my identity ripped away? About finding out my whole life was built on someone else's lies? Are you serious? His reference to his own past, his memory loss, his years living as Jason Morgan hung between them. He of all people understood the fragility of self. And that understanding made her betrayal of another self all the more heinous to him. Knowing what that pain feels like should have made you the last person on earth to inflict it on someone else. You didn't just tell a secret, Willow. You launched a cruise missile into the middle of her life. For what? To get out of a hard question. His words were lashing her, each one a fresh blow. The people around them had fallen silent, watching this more intimate, more brutal drama unfold within the larger one. Cameras, which had been ordered off, were likely still capturing audio. But Drew was beyond caring. Willow, defensive and horrified, shot back, her own anger rising through the shame. You're defending Nina? After everything she's done? To Carly, to Sunny, to everyone? You're standing here judging me for telling the truth about a woman who has spent years lying and manipulating. It was the wrong thing to say. It framed her act as a moral reckoning, a justified exposure of a villain. It stripped away any last pretense of helplessness and revealed it, in Drew's searing perspective, as an act of calculated cruelty disguised as panic. This wasn't about justice, Willow, he roared, his finger jabbing in the direction of the weeping Nina. This was about you. Your fear. Your weakness. You saw a way out of the hot seat and you took it no matter who you destroyed. You're no better than Nellie. You have the same selfish, destructive DNA. The comparison to her late sister, the embodiment of all the darkness Willow feared was in her bloodline, was the final unforgivable insult. It confirmed her deepest terror, that she was at her core tainted and cruel. Her face crumpled, then hardened with a defensive fury of her own. Get out of my way, Drew. Or what? He challenged, his body taut as a wire. You'll ruin my life too? Go ahead. See if you can find a secret of mine to blurt out and wreck me while you're at it. The venom was mutual now. The bond that had been slowly, tenderly built over months of shared glances, quiet support, and unspoken understanding was not just broken. It was being incinerated in real time. You self-righteous bastard. Willow hissed, tears of rage now mingling with those of grief. You stand there on your mountain of honor judging everyone. Where was your honor when you were lying to everyone as Jason? Where was it then? You don't care about the truth. You just care about controlling it. You're mad because I took your secret, Nina's secret. And I told it, and you lost control of the narrative. She was hitting where she knew it would hurt, attacking his core identity as an honorable man. And she was right in a twisted way. Part of his fury was about the loss of control, about a promise broken, about the chaotic, cruel way the truth had been unleashed. But to him that was precisely the point. Honor was about how you handled the truth, not just about keeping it. The verbal blows were escalating, each one landing with the force of a physical punch. The surrounding chaos had faded into a dull roar. For Drew, the world had narrowed to Willow's face, to the words coming from her mouth that were distorting every good thing he had ever believed about her. And then she said it. The thing that crossed the last conceivable line. You want to talk about destruction, Drew? You want to talk about selfishness? Look at yourself. You've been hovering around me for months playing the hero thinking you could fix me. But you don't want to fix me. You just wanted to own me. To be the knight for the damaged girl. It made you feel good about yourself. Well, newsflash. I'm not your project. And I'm not your property. I'm Nina Reeves's daughter. And maybe that means I'm selfish and manipulative and everything you hate. But at least I'm not a hypocrite who uses people to polish his own tarnished armor. It was a brutal, sweeping indictment of every kindness he'd ever shown her. It recast his protection as possessiveness, his care as condescension, his honor as vanity. In that moment, she didn't see the man who had stood by her. She saw a symbol of every judgment, every expectation, every person who had ever tried to define her. And she eviscerated him. Drew did not remember deciding to move. There was no thought, no calculation. There was only a red wave of pure, unadulterated reaction. The insult to his character, the vile distortion of his motivations, the sheer, breathtaking ingratitude, coupled with the horrific act she had just committed against Nina. It all fused into a single unstoppable impulse. His arm drew back, not from his shoulder, but from a place of primal wounded fury. And he slapped her. The sound was like the breaking of the world. Her head snapped to the side with the force of it. The gasps, the shouts, the judge's bellowing voice all rushed back in a torrent. Willow staggered, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with a shock so total it momentarily erased the pain. She looked at him as if seeing a monster, a stranger who had just materialized from the man she thought she knew. Drew's hand fell to his side, stinging. He looked at it, then at her face, at the vivid red imprint of his fingers already rising on her pale skin. The rage drained out of him as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a vast, hollow, freezing cavern of horror. What had he done? The bailiffs were on him instantly, grabbing his arms, pulling him back. You're under arrest for assault. one barked in his ear. He didn't resist. He couldn't take his eyes off Willow. Her shock was melting into a pain deeper than the physical blow. It was the pain of ultimate betrayal reciprocated with violence. The one person she had, in her deepest heart, begun to rely on to see as a safe harbor, had just proven to be the most dangerous storm of all. Michael was shouting, trying to get to Drew. Sasha was rushing to Willow, wrapping an arm around her. Nina was still sobbing, now with a hand over her heart, watching the catastrophic consequences of her secret's revelation unfold in surreal, violent detail. As the bailiffs pulled Drew toward a side exit, he finally found his voice, but it was broken. A ragged whisper meant only for her across the suddenly immense space of the courtroom. Willow. But there were no words. There was only the act. The indelible image of his hand striking her face. Any explanation, the pressure, the betrayal of Nina, the vile accusations, crumbled to dust in the face of that single unforgivable motion. He was a man who had survived captivity, amnesia, corporate wars, and identity theft. He had never once raised his hand to a woman. Until now. In a court of law. For all to see. Willow said nothing. She just looked at him, her eyes wells of a new kind of despair, the slap having sealed a truth more definitive than any about parentage, that trust was obliterated, that care was a fragile lie, and that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. The man being hauled away was not the Drew she knew, and the woman he had struck, with the mark of his violence on her face, was not the Willow he had tried to protect. The custody hearing was adjourned in pandemonium. But the real verdict had just been delivered in the aisle of the courtroom. It was a verdict on the limits of loyalty, the high cost of truth, and the terrifying speed with which love, or whatever fragile precursor to it they had nurtured, could transform into its absolute opposite.